Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is Saturday, November 9th, and I'm making the fourth part in a series that I have been doing over the past month or so called Can We Change Our Karma? So this is Can We Change Our Karma Part 4. Now, in Part 3, I said it was the last episode that I was doing. It was the conclusion, but I've gotten so many questions since then that I decided to do one more installment to follow up with some of the loose ends that had come into me through emails that I received from all of you. So I'm going to show you a chart example in this last talk. And the focus of this talk is going to be on some of the more practical nuts and bolts ways in which we can begin to change our karma, because I spoke mostly philosophically, but inevitably I got a lot of questions from people saying, could you be more specific? Like, how do we actually change our karma more specifically? So I'm going to try to approach that today. I'm going to go ahead and show you the chart example first. Now, this comes with permission from one of my clients, and I'm going to go ahead and put her chart on the screen. Now, in this chart, the major issue of the session that we talked about together, I spoke, I think it was probably about 90 minutes with this client. And one of the things that she expressed at the heart of the reading, the big question for her was, why have I had such deep struggles with expressing my musical gifts in the world? Or why have I found it so difficult to believe in their value or worth and invest more of myself into them? This is someone who's a very talented musician, but it has been one of those things that's been kind of on the back burner for her, like her whole life. And so one of the first things that I started with in this chart, when someone says something like that, you look around and you go, okay, let's take inventory on some of the different planets that may represent someone with creative gifts. For example, Venus, which is often connected to art and things like music and singing and anything that's pleasing or sensual. And here we see Venus in the sign of its fall in Virgo in the second house. Now, this is kind of what she has always wished she could do professionally, or just as a focus for her professional life. Here we see a very debilitated Venus as the ruler of the midheaven in the 10th house, which basically means that she's had some problems making this dream a reality. It's been very difficult. And instead, she has been in positions in life that she has felt, stuck or, let's say, frustrated by. So at any rate, there's reasons for that we can talk about. You could analyze the career a lot more. I just wanted to give you a sense of, just how I start looking around the chart when we're looking at this kind of karma. So some troubles around art and translating that into success professionally, or with regard to making money from her musical talent. She can play instruments, she can sing, she's a songwriter. Now, first of all, let's just say the obvious, which is that it's not that easy in this day and age to just be a musician or an artist and have success. So she knows that. She's not stupid, right? But this was a deeper question than just how come my talent hasn't been translated into worldly success. It was also, why do I always neglect it? Why do I push it aside? And for that, what I did was I looked around the chart and I said, okay, what else is there? Well, how about this? We've got the moon and Saturn conjoined in the fourth house with the moon in its fall. The moon, obviously, with Saturn can point to, among other things, a sense of emotional obligation or responsibility in the fourth house, especially perhaps bred in us, so to speak, from our parents, from our background, our upbringing. And in this case, when I inquired with this client about her background with her family and how they felt about her art and music, and if she's had her own family and how family, spouse, and domestic life has played into her relationship with music, that's when all the flashing lights went off. Indeed, this person grew up with both a sibling and a father who seriously degraded her interest in music, really made her feel that it was a completely unrealistic pie in the sky kind of thing to waste time with. And she internalized that at a deep level. Now, that's not to say that we blame necessarily her family for anything. This is her karma. She was born into this situation. because of her own karma. And yet the situation fosters something that she needs to face, that she's here to deal with. And the other thing is that in her marriage, 2 marriages, in the first marriage, she was with someone who also suppressed her interest in art and music tremendously and was even threatened by it. And then she had a second marriage. In the second marriage, she is now with someone who appreciates music a great deal, is even a musician himself. However, she has still felt hemmed in by the responsibilities of being a parent, being a spouse, and also being tied into a job that she doesn't love. Because the practical concern in the second marriage has also been money and raising kids and stuff like that. Now, this is, in a sense, really human stuff. It's not every day, though, that someone who's really talented, musically or whatever, absolutely has this really deep conflicted relationship with whether or not they should even spend time doing what they love in their spare time. So this person has their whole life expressed a pattern of feeling guilty or feeling like it's not worth their time or it's not something that they should take seriously, even though they love it. What to speak of even having some aspirations or dreams of doing it professionally. So when I looked at the chart, I said, this is the Moon Saturn karma, that heavy sense of the burden and weight of family, home, domestic life, the sense of responsibility and duty around it. Some of those things might be your virtues. They might be your gifts. But on the other hand, these might be the things that weigh you down a little bit. So then she asked the question, and this is the focus of our talk today. Her question was this: can I change my karma? Right? Such a frequent question, like I probably get it at least every other session, where someone wants to know if some particularly difficult karma can ever be changed. I'd like to have a lighter, easier, freer relationship with my music. Maybe even, make an album or do something a little bit more serious. Probably not entertaining delusions of grandeur here, but just, can I have a less conflicted relationship with what I love to do? Why do I feel so guilty around it, right? Now, again, there's not just one thing in a chart that will give an explanation for that, but certainly, again, the weight of the moon in its fall in Scorpio with Saturn in the 4th house in a nighttime chart where Saturn is what we call the malefic, contrary to the sect in favor, which means Saturn has the tendency to be the most challenging planet in the chart. Here we have an application, the moon moving into contact with Saturn in a fixed sign. This is a deep, unmoving, solid karma, and it's growing more intense as she ages, you could say, as the symbolic application of the moon to Saturn takes place. Okay, so that's where my analysis focused. And she said, well, maybe for starters, before I tell you, this is me speaking to her, before I tell you anything that you could do to change this, practically speaking, let's take a look at maybe any times in your life where this has already changed. Now, one of the great timing techniques of ancient astrology, which you'll see in the Hindu dasha system or the Indian dasha system, a similar system that came from apparently through Egypt to Vedic Valens, was a technique called zodiacal releasing. Now, with the use of zodiacal releasing, like the dasha system in India, we break the life up into periods of time. During the cycling of these different periods of time, which are like the chapters of a great book of your life, you'll hear that comparison made by a lot of astrologers nowadays who practice zodiacal releasing. It's a good one. As the chapters of your life are unfolding, you get to certain places where there are big breaks in the plot. And these are places where the karma may loosen up. So what I've done in my practice is to look and see if someone has a question about a particular kind of karmic knot, and they want to know when it has the chance to loosen significantly. I will look using one technique. There's a lot of different things you can do, right? You can look at transits to planets. Certain kinds of transits sometimes have more liberating effect on karma in the birth chart, or the potential force for that. We have free will. We have to participate in this after all. But there are windows of time in this zodiacal releasing technique called loosing of the bonds. And the loosing of the bond periods, they come in every so often. In this case, because I'm looking at the lot of fortune in the 12th house, and it happens to be ruled by the moon. We are also connecting this lunar karma in the fourth house, moon in its fall, conjoined with Saturn, to the 12th house lot of fortune, a place that is related to self-undoing. And it so happens that one of the zodiacal releasing techniques that we can use releases and starts its timing cycle of the life from the lunar lot here, the lot of fortune. So that's what I did. And I said, okay, well, let's see if we get any major loosening periods through the study of fortune, because this is so connected to the moon and the lunar karma. And so as I pulled this up for this woman, I looked at her zodiacal releasing periods, and I noticed that between September of 1998 and February of 2000, there was a loosing of the bond that was ruled by Saturn. Okay, so first of all, loosing of the bond that is ruled by Saturn is coming during a major period that's ruled by Leo. The Leo period lasts about 19 years. And then towards the end of that cycle, as I won't go into the details, but as the sort of full cycle of the zodiacal releasing sub-periods concludes, then we hit a loosing of the bond period in Aquarius. Now, it's very interesting that this would focus on her first house and her seventh house. But remember, overall, we're releasing from the lunar lot, which means that we're working with that lunar karma down at the base of the chart in general. So you kind of have to bracket a few things when you're using this technique. It's a more advanced technique that I teach in my second year program. So the first house, the house of self and identity, seventh house that the loosing of the bond is taking place in, is ruled by Saturn and is the house of marriage. So I guess that around this time, there was a major loosening, a possibility for a big karmic shift around this tendency to feel intensely obligated and repressed, especially around family and marriage dynamics. Indeed, during that time, she divorced her first husband. And not only that, but then after she divorced her first husband, she went back and lived with her father for a time. And it was during that time that, because she had divorced her husband in large part because he was so suppressive of what she felt like was her true spirit, especially her musical interests. Then she went back during this period to live with her father and decided that her father was also same thing that he had been when she had been growing up, somewhat, what's the word, oppressive towards her surrounding or related in relation to her music. And then she moved out of her father's house. So she divorced, went back to live with her father, so she kind of divorced both of them at that moment. And this was a major shift in her life, which then led to another marriage after the loosing of the bond period was over, this time with a musician, the marriage that she's been in since. Now, pretty cool, huh? So that's a loosening of the bond period. That is a time where there is the moment of a karmic cycle is coming full circle, and our ability to make intelligent decisions to get out of a lower and more ignorant, unconscious pattern presents itself. And if we move on that pattern, then a lot of the times some of the bonds that have been holding us are released. And then in terms of trying to move towards the results that we're hoping for, like having more time with my music or making an album or whatever the case might be, can present themselves. Okay. So then I went back in and I said, okay, let's look at one more period, because there was one more releasing period. And this period came in the next cycle, which was a Virgo cycle, Mercury ruled. And actually, this one came in June of 2017. We hit a Pisces 8th house period. And the 8th house period, as you can see in her natal chart, Mars is retrograde in Pisces in the 8th house natally. And between June of 2017 and June of 2018, she hits another loosing of the bond period in her life. This one ruled by Jupiter, should be a little bit more uplifting than a Saturnine one. However, this Pisces period is in the 8th house. And it's also really important that Mars is in that 8th house that the loosing of the bond is taking place in. Why, you ask? Because remember, the base lunar karma that we're looking at, the base tendency to get locked up and obligated and maybe feel really repressed, especially around things like family, father, spouses, etc., in relation to your true needs, wants, wishes, desires, including the music, right? So this Mars is the dispositor for the moon and Saturn, which means that the moon and Saturn are in Scorpio, which is Mars's sign. Mars, during this loosing of the bond period in her life, is activated in the 8th house and is intimately tied to the moon and Saturn. Okay, so not only that, but again, remember, this is another loosing of the bond that's taking place, releasing from the lot of fortune in Cancer, the lunar lot. So for this reason, I said this might have also been a significant period for you. What happened during this period? Dad died. So here we have the 4th house karma around family, parents, father in particular with Saturn in the 4th, and the repressive or restrictiveness around those things disposed of by Mars in the 8th house of death. This was overall a very positive period for her. Again, another major releasing moment for her around her music. Right after her father passed, she started getting back into music again and started taking some classes and things like that, and has been kind of riding a wave of momentum since, but has still continued to struggle with the same themes as ever. Still in her second marriage and still feeling like, it's not like husband is suppressing my interest in music, but there's no big support for it. And maybe it's kind of looked at by everyone as maybe kind of a waste of time. So, but especially within herself, is this a waste of time? Okay, so that's like the karmic level of analysis, right? But there's a few points that we can draw from this study, and they are this. Let's do one. We'll just go through them one at a time. One is that one of the main things that people don't typically understand about karma is that it's harder to change. It's not as easy for each individual to change it as the next. So it's not as though everybody will get the same impact out of positive thinking. This is why people can very easily get frustrated with someone who says, if you want to change your karma, just think better thoughts, or, get into that room and play your guitar and just own it, sister, which is what I kind of wanted to say. Like, just go play your music, just go do it. But why doesn't it change? Why is it so conflicted and difficult? Why doesn't just some positive encouragement or advice work? Why is the pattern so stable? Why do we see, these are long periods apart, 98 to 2000 and 2017, right? That's like almost 20 years apart where we see these major moments of releasing, and yet the pattern is still there. It's lessening, but it's still there. So this is because everyone's karma is not equal. The approach to changing karma is not a one-size-fits-all solution. First of all, that's for starters. The second thing that's really important is that it's also very important to be careful of the difference between results and outcomes that we want and an inner experience that we're seeking. So a lot of the times when people think about changing their karma, what they're asking is, can I change a result? Can I change an outcome? And I've mentioned this in the previous talks, I have to say it again. The problematic part of this approach to changing karma is that insofar karma is not equal for anyone. It's different, it weighs different, and it changes differently at different rates and speeds for reasons that we can't comprehend. But once you do want to change it, it often takes a really long time. And insofar as we are only invested in the change of outcome, i.e., I play more music, I make an album, I sing at a coffee shop, whatever, like that. If those are the kinds of things that we're interested in, different material outcomes, I have a bigger house, I make more money, whatever, it takes an especially long time. It takes longer for most of us. This is just a general rule. It's different for everyone. Sometimes people can change their karma very quickly. But as a general rule, the more that we are fixated on a material outcome as the kind of thing we want to see changing, it is a longer process, because patterns on the material level are denser, right? And so they're harder to move. They take more time, generally speaking, unless someone has the qualified karma to make changes rapidly. But that's not really due to, the material universe suddenly becoming less dense. That's due to their karma qualifying them for a more rapid transformation of circumstance. Okay, so those are the first two things. One, karma changes at different rates for different people. And two, if you are focused only on the change of material outcomes, it, as a general rule, things in the material universe are more dense, so they take more time. Okay. Now, the third rule is this: to the extent that we are more identified with material circumstances and material outcomes, right? Meaning, I identify my sense of well-being, peace, happiness, joy, pleasure with material circumstances and outcomes. Not only is the karma generally taking longer to change, but we are also more predictable. So there's the three rules. I'll go over them again. Not all karma changes at the same rates of time for everyone, so there's very little we can do with one-size-fits-all solutions like vision board or simple positive thinking. Sometimes that works for people, but it has more to do with, again, the fact that their karma qualifies them for a more rapid change, because if they change their mind, things around them start to change really rapidly. That's due to an accumulation of good karma, in a sense, good karma, bad karma in this relative sense. The second thing, as I mentioned, is that the karma changes generally very slowly for people, the more that they are invested in outcomes, in concrete, material, circumstantial events that they want to see happen. They're kind of measurable in some way. Okay, it takes longer because it's denser. And, the third piece here, and I'm going to forget my third piece. What was it? Oh my gosh. Hold on. Let me get my notes. Right. So, and the third part was that we are more predictable in general, the more that we are identified with and invested in concrete material events and outcomes. To the extent that we identify our sense of self with them, we are more predictable. So those are like three rules. Okay, those are very basic rules as well, and they're mostly taken from the yogic tradition, but you can see a lot of useful comparisons in the way that many Western mystics talk about the way in which people relate to and change their fate. Okay, so very similar ideas across the board. Now, there is, however, another path to changing our karma, and that is that rather than identifying our sense of who we are or what makes us happy with a particular material event or outcome that we want in the future, even if that material outcome or event appears very noble or virtuous, like, I just want to spend more time playing my music. Like, who of any of us is going to sit and tell someone like, oh, what a low-minded thing to want to do, to just have more quality time to do something that you love, right? But we have to ask the question, is it really playing more music that's going to make, you happy? No. In the big sense of things, what ancient mystics were onto was this idea that it doesn't, like, if you can change your karma in the material sense very slowly, often over a long period of time, but the problem with that is that even if you accumulate a lot of good karma, eventually you lose it. So even people who have played instruments for a really long time can suddenly lose their ability to play. For example, I think it was Julie Andrews. I heard this said recently, that Julie Andrews, who was Mary Poppins in The Sound of Music, she was the star of both of those movies. She had a surgery on her voice at one point, and then she just couldn't sing. So similarly, people can play music and be really, really good at it, and at some point, for whatever reason, it stops being the source of joy and happiness for them. And then it changes, and then something else does, and then there's new frustrations and new struggles. So the point is that what ancient mystics were interested in was, they were interested in not so much the external thing that is being associated with happiness, but the inherent state of happiness itself. How do we step into peace, contentment, and happiness in a sense that is not connected to things that are transient? Is it possible that we can cultivate these things as spirit souls who ultimately are not even going to stay in any given body for very long? So that's what they were interested in. So while so many people come in to an astrology reading concerned about how to change the karma, right? The other underlying problem with the question of how to change the karma is that as long as that's the real question, how do I change my karma? Again, you're locked into these three problems. You're locked into the problem that everyone's karma change at different rates and paces. So there's not really a one size fits all answer. Two, if you want to move things around in terms of outcomes, it's slower and heavier, denser, generally speaking. So these things are not. It's not easy to. It's not easy to move karma around. And the more that we're invested in that, also, the more predictable we are, the more predictable our lives are. That's actually the antithesis of our freedom. So then astrologers, ancient mystics and astrologers from both the East and the West, they were interested in a higher state of consciousness, a higher state of happiness that's there in you, flowing through everything, the ups and the downs. Whether you have a lot of time to play your instrument or sing, or whether you're, having to sit in a cubicle, whatever the karma might be, how do we cultivate a state of consciousness that is the true wealth, joy, and happiness? And it's not tethered to any of this. That's what they were interested in. From that standpoint, the question of how to change my karma is it's a different picture. Right. So on one level, there's a whole section of ancient astrology that's devoted to helping people change their karma more rapidly in terms of material outcomes as well. This is where all different kinds of magic comes into play. Amulets, herbs, all sorts of things to either mitigate problems or create abundance or get rid of an enemy or whatever. Insofar as people are interested in all of that, as I've said previously, they're not necessarily going to get a different result. The same kinds of ups and downs will generate, even as they think that they're changing their karma for the better. Eventually, the better becomes the worse, and the worse becomes the better, because things just keep moving in the material world, and opposites attract, right? So we go through these fluctuating states, and sometimes a good state appears to last for a long time, and then we think, oh, well, I'm good, I don't have to worry about anything. But eventually something creeps in, and suddenly, like Julie Andrews, you lose your voice, you can't sing anymore, something like that. That's the material world. It's very, it's predictably unpredictable in terms of trying to maintain your source of happiness and the external objects of the world. So if we set aside all of that project, right, we have to deal with that. I mean, I take herbs. My wife and I are going to be working on Herb Planet and Plant series coming up in the new year. So it's not that I'm against any of that. Like, people ask me how to change their karma all the time. And one of the pieces of advice that I had for this woman, for example, was, taking more time to sing for yourself. You're going to have to be disciplined. You're going to have to just do it and make yourself do it, even if the voice inside says don't, or says you should feel guilty or whatever. You're just going to have to make yourself do it, and just have a little bit of a confrontation with that voice. That's how you change that karma, at least in part, right? So there's some simple advice we can give as astrologers, the same kind of advice that friends should give us, right, about how to change your karma. We can't always see it, but sometimes, most of the time, it's really pretty simple stuff. Another thing that that we talked about was that ultimately, though, and this is where we're heading now in sort of part 2 of this talk, ultimately, though, what you're really yearning for, let's be clear, is that you're yearning to connect with that thing that brings you joy and happiness, not the oughts, the shoulds, etc., where you can put a notch in your belt for having done the right thing, paid the bills, made the father happy, made the spouse, whatever. that may feel good in a kind of linear sense, like, well, I did the correct thing. I did the correct thing. But if it's not bringing you joy, then, you need to take time to invest yourself in the things where your heart opens up and you feel free and you feel connected to your spirit soul. You feel that happiness flowing in. If it's the guitar that does that for you, or if it's the piano that does that for you, or if it's singing really loud or performing for people that does that for you, then as Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss, right? And make room for it and stand up for it. So those are the practical advice. That's the practical advice around the material karma, trying to get more time for music. But it's underlying that. The thing that she's really looking for, which is what I emphasized, was the joy, the happiness of connecting to your soul and your source. For many people, lots of different things do that for people. But music has been one of those kinds of things for ages, right? So that's what I tried to focus on, is it's actually about connecting with something that brings you joy and happiness. Now, in order to experience joy and happiness, if that's what we really are looking for, then in terms of changing our karma to so that it's a different paradigm. To the question of, can I change my karma? Once we start asking about how can I be situated in eternal transcendental joy, peace, contentment, happiness, etc. Once that becomes our target goal, and we've differentiated that a little bit from, if I make an album or not, or if I perform for people or not, or how much literal hours do I spend playing my guitar, and then I'll know that I've really done the right thing. Once we separate the state of consciousness that we're looking for behind all of our material pursuits, which is joy, which is love, which is peace, which is happiness, then we can start to reapproach the question of changing my karma from a totally different place. Most of the time, again, until this is our goal, until our goal is an inherent state of being, love, peace, and until those spiritual virtues and so those spiritual states of consciousness are our goal, we tend to be predictable. Things move more slowly than we would like, and patterns keep repeating themselves and more predictably, right? There's not an easy answer for dealing with those kinds of problems either. It's very complicated. That's why a diet will come out, everyone will like it, and then a couple months later it'll be debunked and everyone will be frustrated with it and it won't be working, and then we're on to a new diet. There is no one size fits all solution. It's very difficult to make changes if that's the karmic world that we're in. To the extent that we, again, have not identified that what we're really looking for is an inner, eternal sense of peace, happiness, and joy, birthright of our soul, right? If we're not looking for the soul, if we're not looking for our divine purpose for existence, then that's the world we tend to get locked into. Our birth charts become very predictable. Okay. We always have free will. Our free will is always there. But the point is that when we're locked into this kind of use of our free will, it's not very free at all. It's actually very bound, which is why specifically using this technique, I looked at those periods called loosing of the bond periods, right? To see when there's an opportunity for the bondage of this pattern to loosen up a little bit and for choice to break through and make some changes. But it's slow moving for a lot of people, a lot of us. Okay. Now, if we want to change into the seeking of peace, joy, happiness on the spiritual platform, then it involves a different kind of activity. First of all, we have to work on the cultivation of new values and new habits. I'm taking this from one of my spiritual teachers. The cultivation of new values and new habits, for example, we have to get really, really real with ourselves and realize what it is behind the karmic wheel that we keep going around in that is getting us stuck. So an evaluation of our values includes recognizing our own propensity for greed, to be greedy. It's just like simple. We're not trying to be medieval and, crazy about this. It's just, we tend to be greedy. We tend to lust after things that do not fulfill us. We tend to be angry and frustrated when we don't get our way. We tend to demand more of others than we do of ourselves. So many things like this, just starting to examine our own culpability and sort of the twisted web of stuff that we hold in our consciousness all the time that's not really helping us, that's keeping us locked in this wheel. Okay, so first comes the evaluation of our values and then how they're connected to habits. Well, I tend to get frustrated because I don't get my way or, whatever. And then what do? I just double down, on working harder and trying to get results, and then I get migraines. So that's a habit connected to a value, right? I think that if I get a whole bunch of stuff done, then I'll be happy. So we're connecting action and material outcomes to happiness. That is a form of lust, because we are lusting after an outcome that we think will satiate us, just like you're lusting after something you shouldn't eat. The reason that you shouldn't eat it is because it makes you feel sick afterwards. It makes you feel bad. It doesn't make you feel good. So similarly, we lust after all sorts of things in the world that we think will make us happy. They don't. Then we get frustrated that they don't. And so then we have a habit or a pattern or a way of reacting to that. It further entangles us, and it starts really harming us. So we have to look at values and we have to look at habits. We have to be really honest, do a kind of a ruthless self-inventory, not being mean to ourselves, but not giving ourselves a hall pass so we can go wander and miss the exercise. This is something that we each have to do. And we have to do it pretty regularly because it's not just it's an ongoing process, right? Then what we have to do is think about creating new habits. So if we move from kind of bad habits, envy, vanity, greed, lust, frustration, anger, bitterness, sadness, and these are the things that are just constantly filling us as we're groping around trying to get happiness that really is not coming to us very easily or doesn't last or is really difficult to maintain or whatever. All right, then we get a clear sense of what they are, and then we start having to cultivate things like intuition, along with a conscience. So our conscience, the voice of how to make a wise decision and how to make a true, good, morally upright, virtuous choice in every moment, along with a sense of intuition of how to do so, when to do so. We have to cultivate that. We have to cultivate a sense of integrity, trustfulness, truthfulness, humility. We have to cultivate cleanliness, keeping a clean environment around us. So we start to cultivate new habits and new values. The point is that this starts to elevate our karma. The material karma will start to change. This is one of the quickest universal ways to change your karma. But it's not like changing your karma like, fixing a car, right? It's sort of like saying, instead of saying like, well, how do I fix my car so it works because I really like driving around in my Benz, This is more like saying, try walking. Walking feels good, makes you feel great. Your body feels good afterward. You get oxygen moving through your body, your blood. So, by cultivating a new set of values, a higher set of values, as well as habits and practices that are coming out of those values, then we slowly, our karma starts to elevate. Our life starts to become more peaceful, less chaotic, generally speaking. It can still take time, but that's the general set of actions for everyone. And the purpose of this is that these are goods in and of themselves. We're not pursuing these new values and habits because we think they're going to get us something. We're doing them because we trust that they are good and are peaceful and produce contentment in and of themselves. So that's the first step. There are 5 questions that I heard a spiritual teacher of mine say that we can use when considering any action as we're trying to cultivate better values and better habits. Those 5 questions are this. First of all, it's the physical question. Is this good for my health? Simple. If it's not, your answer is clear, right? But all 5 have to be considered. So that's the first one. Is it good for my health? Treat your body and our mind like a temple, right? That's it. The simple way to change your karma, to start stepping towards the inherent peaceful, blissful nature of reality that's not connected to anything, any circumstance. It can be found flowing through everything. It's there already in everything. First question to ask to move toward that is this choice good for my health? The second question has to do with the mind. Is what I am exposing myself to right now, whether it's my thoughts, my voice in my head, the things I'm saying, the people I'm surrounding myself with, the things I'm looking at on my phone or whatever, is it good for my mind? And, I'm not like everybody has to answer that on their own, but if you're cultivating the voice of your conscience by asking this question repeatedly and being thoughtful about it, we don't have to be perfect about it, but we're being thoughtful about, is this good for my mind? Does this create peaceful ecology of mind? And if the answer to that is yes, if we feel good about it, then that's the second thing to consider. Good for health, good for peace of mind. Second thing is ethical. Maybe the most simple form of the ethical is to ask ourselves, is what I'm doing truthful, honest, kind? Truthful, honest, kind. Is it sincere? Right? So I guess truthful and honest are basically the same thing, but is it truthful? Is it sincere? Do I have integrity here? 3 things. The fourth one is aesthetic. Is it beautiful? Is what I'm doing creating more beauty in the world? That's important because beauty is part of peace. Peace and beauty go hand in hand. Interestingly, that peace and beauty can be found anywhere in anything at all times. That's the crazy thing about this state of happiness that we're seeking. That's why in the Bible, we call it the peace that passes understanding. Seems like it shouldn't be peaceful because it's real gnarly or challenging. But it is. And where there's peace, there's beauty. Is it beautiful? Is it producing beauty? And the fifth one, maybe the highest of the 5, is does it create unconditional love, or does it push me closer to unconditional love? Another way of phrasing that, if you're a little bit more theologically inclined, is it bringing me closer to God? Is it bringing me closer to divinity or spirit? Am I cultivating a deeper, loving connection to reality itself? The immanent reality that's here, the transcendent reality that's beyond. The reality of God that lives in me and in others, and the reality of God that is a transcendental being that I'm in a relationship with, both the immanent and the transcendent. If we can answer yes to all of those questions, even if we're answering yes to just a few of those questions, gradually what we're doing is we're starting to put ourselves into the what yogis would call, yoga philosophers would call the sattvic platform. So sattva gun, or the material mode of goodness. And it's not that mode is the goal itself, right? It's not that this is where it gets even, we go one step higher with this. So we cultivate these values and these habits, and we ask ourselves these questions, and we try to guide our actions in that way, not thinking, what can I get out of this? Just thinking these values, these habits, these practices are good in and of themselves. Our karma starts to change around us. And what's delightful about it is that our karma changes in ways that are surprising and beautiful. I personally like surprise gifts better than telling someone what to give me, because I like it when someone's thoughtfulness connects me to them at a deeper level. I like that better than I like saying, well, I just need a pair of shoes. You're an order supplier. It's my birthday. Let's go. So the universe is similar. The universe is like, trust me, guys. If you just cultivate these virtues and these practices, they elevate you to the platform of peace. The way in which your karma changes ends up being a gift from the best, most imaginative, creative, gift-giving lover you've ever had. Right? So that's the idea. But what's even better than that, what goes one step further, and this is sort of at the core of bhakti, devotional practices, is that we don't even really want the gift from the lover. The gift from the lover is nice. But what we really want is the lover. What we really want is the one giving the gift. And as we step into this peaceful platform, the real point of doing so is not to change our karma because we're excited about a gift, even the most surprising, innovative gifts. We're not even concerned with that. What happens on the Sattvic platform is that we can start to see, hey, the universe, God, divinity is giving me gifts. They're amazing. But that's not the point. The point is, oh my God, look at God, right? Oh my God, look at divinity. And then divinity starts drawing closer and closer and closer to us. We care less and less and less about its gifts. We care more and more, and it becomes an endless competition. Oh, you just gave me a gift? Let me give you something from me, from my heart. Let me serve you. Let me love you. Let me worship you. Let me write to you. Let me sing to you. The more that we do that, the more in interesting ways that divinity reciprocates with us. And the point is we start forging the transcendental swarup, the form, our actual true form starts to emerge. In Bhakti, we say that this leads us back home to the spiritual worlds. Now, whether you believe that or not so much a big deal. I would just say that it's important to understand that even in many different paths of yoga, this is really the point. It's not so much what you get out of it as much as it is that you start developing absorption in the thing that's giving to you. The thing, right? Like in the Bhagavat Purana, which tells the story of the creation of the universe. When Lord Brahma is creating the universe, he basically has this insight, and I'm just going to summarize this. I'm no great scholar. I'm such a neophyte when it comes to the Puranas or anything like that, but compared to my teachers anyway, Brahma basically has this insight that the universe is made through tapasya, which is like heat. It's the heat of intense concentration. In some ways, that means desire. In other ways, it has another meaning that's like penance. But if you think about the thing that the world, like the Buddha saying, the world is on fire, that insofar as we're concerned with getting anything, right, then the way that divinity appears to us is as a provider, right? But eventually we want to graduate past give me, give me, give me, right? And we want, because then the only way we can get to know divinity is the one that says, here you go, here you go, here you go, which is really mechanistic and objectifying, even on a really highly creative level. Even when you're walking around very peaceful, have really good cultivated virtues and habits, you have a higher use of your free will available to you. You're not as predictable. Your birth chart's you're not as bound to it. You're starting to loosen up from the karmic realm. Divinity is pouring in blessings and surprising ways. Even on that level, the underlying churning of that wheel is still thought of as God as the sacrificial fire that we're pouring things into and that we get results back from as a result, the heat of that desire wheel. To move out of that, we start saying, like, the desire wheel is great, but I'm actually desiring the one who's turning it. I start looking at that and going like, wow, like that's what I want. And I want to be close to that in my heart. How do I serve that? How do I be close to that wonderful being, that beingness, that divine presence? So that's the two levels at which we're working with this question of, can I change my karma? And again, to the extent that this isn't our occupation in life, and we are not primarily concerned with changing our values and our habits to elevate us to the mode of goodness, getting out of greed, lust, envy, hatred, bitterness, competition, strife, all these things that we get wrapped up in specifically because we're competing for temporary, transient resources that really do not bring us the kind of infinite happiness that we're actually looking for. Our appetite for happiness is actually way bigger than we think it is. If that's all that we're invested in, we are predictable. Our birth charts, we are more bound to than we think we are. Whatever free will we have and we think we're using, meddling around with the karmic stuff, it's going to take slower than we think it will. The patterns will repeat at deeper levels than we even are aware of existing. And it's the results that we get will not ultimately be satisfying. Even if they last a couple hundred lifetimes, they won't ultimately be satisfying in the scope of an eternal spirit soul. Right? So that's what ancient astrologers are dealing with. Plato, he's not a yogi in the sense of, his treatises are not like the yogic scriptures. They're very different. But he says things that are remarkably similar. The Pythagoreans, the Orphics, the Hermeticists, all the schools of philosophy that we know about in the West, the esotericists that informed the philosophical basis of Western astrology have very similar things to say, especially the Hermetic philosophers. And we say astrology comes from Hermes. Okay, so I hope that this fourth part was interesting for you guys. I'll repeat those 5 questions about actions that you should take. Physical, is it good for health? Mind, is it good for my mind? Ethical, is it truthful and just? 4, does it create beauty? And 5, does it draw me closer towards unconditional love? So in that sense, those are the questions we can ask ourselves that help us move closer to the platform of material goodness, which then is like the precursor. It puts us in the right position to start receiving that connection to divinity that can move beyond what can I get to who are you? Who am I? Wow, let's dance, right? So I want to thank my client for letting me use her chart. And one of the things that I said to her was, I said, just remember that, first of all, go play your guitar more. Go whatever it was. I think it was your guitar. Go play your guitar more. Sing more. Do the things that fill you with love. But remember that the just reward for doing so is not that you get anything, not that you've accomplished anything, but rather that you're honoring the need that your spirit soul has to experience bliss and happiness. The more that you do that over time, right, and prioritize those things that bring you closer to that. Is it good for my mind? Is it good for my body, etc.? The more that you are going to start bringing that consciousness into your life, so that even if next lifetime you don't love playing the guitar as much, you'll have the muscle memory developed to keep going, drawing closer to the source of all joy and all happiness. Thank you guys for listening. I hope this was a good 4th installment. If you are interested in the ancient metaphysics and the ancient sort of karmic analytics of Hellenistic astrology, and a little with a dose of Indian astrology as well, because of my background in Bhakti, then come check out my course. It starts on next Saturday, a week from today, on the 16th. There's still room in the class. I'd love to have you guys join. And there's need-based tuition for students who are in need as well. It's a fantastic, beautiful thing to be able to sit down. First of all, if it doesn't blow your mind, right, to see people sitting down asking about this and go like, whoa, what about 1998 to 2000? Maybe this is a time where this stuff really loosened up. Oh yeah, I divorced the guy who was saying I shouldn't play music, and then went and lived with my father, and then got out with him, and like, that's amazing. I had no idea. I just used the tools that ancient astrologers gave us. Pretty cool. I'd love to study with you guys. Come and tell me in the comments section. Hit me up. Tell me what you're thinking about, how you're enjoying this 4th part of the series, any reflections that come to mind after listening to it. Okay, everyone, take care. Bye.